Dan from bodybuilderinthailand.com. All right, guys, steroids versus performance enhancing drugs. What is the difference? Explained. All right, so most people say when they're talking about performance enhancing drugs in general, they say steroids. And I've noticed that a lot of people that talk about, athletes that die and things like that, they say steroids killed him. Okay, and there's a difference here, because when you're talking about steroids versus performance enhancing drugs, you're talking about hormones versus an array of other compounds. So I'm not saying that steroids can't contribute to someone's early death, but something like acute death as a result of a steroid overdose is pretty much unheard of. Usually, like a hormonal substance can do things like causing, high blood pressure or like plaque buildup in the arteries and things of that nature, which over time have a cumulative effect and shorten the lifespan, or they can contribute to like a cardiac event that results in the death of someone. But just like steroids killing you is not something that is it's not something that's really like been documented by medical science. Like, he died of an acute overdosage of anabolic steroid hormones. So when we're talking about the difference here between performance enhancing drugs, which can kill you in an acute overdosage, and steroids, which are a male hormone, it's important when we're talking about, like what killed this guy, to understand the difference and to not use steroids as the blanket term, okay? Because then if we're just saying, steroids killed them, then we're also talking about birth control pills killed them and an array of other shit. Any substance which has a, cholesterol-based molecule that then has sex characteristics is considered a steroid hormone. So it's considered a steroid. So, steroids are things, that are based off of testosterone. They're things that are based off of estrogen. They're things that are based off of progesterone. Okay, there's a lot of, it's all sex hormones. Steroids are sex hormones. Performance enhancing drugs are a wide array of things, okay? So let's talk about, what kind of performance enhancing drugs are used in athletics that can acute overdose, easily kill someone. So number one would be insulin. Insulin, you're not used to hearing this in performance sports. You think diabetes, right? Well, insulin drives nutrients across cell membranes, okay? And it makes cells be able to recover the energy that they lost during exercise or energy expenditure, like that, very, very quickly, okay? So athletes, not just bodybuilders, but athletes, this is a big part of their regimen and being able to train more often. You hear guys, like, remember when the Balco scandal happened, where all the Olympic athletes were using performance enhancing drugs, okay? So insulin was a big factor in the array or the repertoire of drugs that those Olympic athletes were using. And the reason why is because it allowed them to be able to train harder and more frequently. So more training, more practice equals better performance. How does it do this? Well, your muscles run on carbohydrates. And so those carbohydrates, when you're using your muscles, in a very energy expensive way, those carbohydrates are being used up, they're being burned, and they're lost from inside the muscle tissue. And then during the recovery phase, your body then, as you eat your meals, there's carbohydrates in your meals, there's protein in your meals, which through gluconeogenesis in the liver, protein can be converted to carbohydrates, if you're not eating enough carbohydrates. And then those carbohydrates, those sugar molecules are then shuttled via insulin across the cell membranes of muscle tissue and stored in those muscle tissue. And it's locked in there. It's stored, it's locked in. The body can't get it out without breaking down the muscle tissue or without expending energy through that muscle tissue, which gets rid of the carbohydrates, and then it needs to be restored again. So maximum performance is achieved when your muscles are full of, and this is athletic performance. I'm not just talking about bodybuilding performance. I'm talking about maximum athletic performance is achieved when the muscles are full of carbohydrate stores, okay? They're glycogen. That's how you say it. Carbohydrate stored within the muscle is called glycogen. So when glycogen stores are full, that's when maximum performance is achieved. Okay, well, you can hugely speed up this process of achieving full glycogen stores through the use of insulin. And how this happens is that these athletes also use human growth hormone with it. So human growth hormone, when it's used, it really has a blocking effect to fat cells. And it has a effect of nutrient partitioning or greater ease of nutrients crossing cell membranes in muscle cells. It makes specifically nutrients crossing cell membranes into muscle cells an easier, more preferable process, whereas it makes nutrients crossing cell membranes into fat cells a very difficult process, okay? So that's called nutrient partitioning. And so I'm going to talk about Olympic athletes again, because we're talking about performance enhancing drugs versus steroids. What is the difference? These guys that were being trained by Victor Conti, these Olympic athletes from Balco. Victor Conti was like their guru, right? From Balco. And he had them on 4.5 IUs of Serostim, FDA human growth hormone per day. And then they would use insulin after their workouts. And so the growth hormone made it so that the nutrients, would have that partitioning effect. And then the insulin pushed the nutrients from the meals across the cell membranes, filled the muscles back up. So then, the next day they're ready to go and they can train at maximum intensity again. Okay? So that would be an example of athletes using performance enhancing drugs that are not steroids, okay? Because insulin is not a sex hormone. It's not a steroid, and neither is growth hormone. It's not a sex hormone. It's not a steroid, okay? It's a protein hormone. It's called a peptide. So it's not an anabolic steroid, okay? I gotta get this through to you, okay? Because people die from using insulin. People go into comas and die from using insulin. If you overdose on insulin and you do not have enough carbs to make your blood sugar be stable or, cover that insulin, you will die. You'll go into a coma and die. So professional athletes, this is a very dangerous drug that they utilize, and insulin. And this would be one of the performance enhancing drugs that is responsible for acute deaths in athletes. All right, now let's talk about some more performance enhancing drugs. All right, one is amphetamine. Now, amphetamine, normally you think of this as, oh, that's a street drug, right? Well, amphetamine is produced by pharmaceutical companies in the form of ADHD medications. So that's actually the most pure form of amphetamines, really, that exist. It's done at a very high standard, monitored by the government to make sure that it's very high quality and pure. Okay, so what is Adderall? Adderall is a mixture of different amphetamine salts. So it's different slight variations of the amphetamine molecule all stuck together into one pill or tablet or whatever, okay? And what does low doses of amphetamine do to humans? Well, it increases their focus, it increases their concentration, and it increases their reaction times. So here's an example of an athlete who is using amphetamines, Wes Welker. Wes Welker is a wide receiver in the NFL. He was suspended a few years ago from playing for several games because he tested positive for Adderall, amphetamines. Why would he use amphetamines during a game? Well, it increases his reaction time. So, for example, when the ball is snapped, he's able to, 1 microsecond quicker start running his route. When the ball is in the air, he's able to increase his reaction time to get his hands in the area of the ball. It increases these. That's why people use it when they do testing. It increases their focus. It increases their reaction time. It increases their memory comprehension and able to retrieve those memories. For athletes, it increases their reaction time. They're able to make decisions more quicker. Their reflexes work a little bit quicker. And it's on a very micro scale, though. It's very small, but when you're at the top of the game, these very small differences can mean the difference between winning or losing. So, is amphetamine a steroid? Absolutely not. That's what Adderall is. Adderall is amphetamine salts, a combination of amphetamine molecules. And it is not a steroid, yet it is a performance-enhancing drug that is used in sports. And of course, we know that amphetamine helps the body to reduce or release large amounts of adrenaline. And this can result in combination with really pushing the body in athletics, in cardiac events and deaths. And so this is what you see when you see people, remember in the UK a few years ago when DMAA, the original ingredient in Jack 3D, was really popular? There was a lot of pre-workout supplements coming out with that ingredient. And basically what was happening is that people were taking it and working out really hard, training really hard, or they would run marathons and become dehydrated. And in the combination of taking that strong amphetamine-like compound, because DMAA, dimethylamine, 1,3-dimethylamine, that's what the name of that is. The main ingredient in Jacked 3D that made it, that pre-workout supplement that really made it like popular and like people, whoa, this is crazy shit, right? Well, that supplement contained that DMAA, which is an amphetamine-like compound, and amphetamine-like compounds and amphetamines increase the risk of cardiac events. Okay, and so people would have heart attacks and die while they were running their marathons. This happened it was especially prominent in the UK about 4 or 5 years ago. 3, 4, or 5 years ago, this was happening before it mostly got banned, and I haven't really heard many stories about it since. But is DMAA an anabolic steroid? Absolutely not. Is DMAA a sex hormone? Absolutely not. It's an amphetamine-like compound that increases reaction time, increases stamina, increases endurance, increases the ability for the mind to push the body. Okay, so it's a performance-enhancing drug. All right, and then we have other performance-enhancing drugs too. I can't get into all of them, but I want you guys to understand, though, that generally, if we're talking about an event that kills an athlete, an acute event that kills an athlete, like an overdose on a compound, right? It's not going to be sex hormones that are doing that. Generally, sex hormones increase the risk of injury and death if taken in high dosages over long periods of time without monitoring blood work and without doctor supervision. Over time, these hormones can cause changes to the body that add up, that increase the risk of things like cardiac events, failure of vital organs. That's what mostly the dangers of sex hormones are. I'm not a doctor, and this is not medical advice. But this is simply me expressing my opinions, and it's me expressing my knowledge on these substances, researching and educating myself on what athletes do and the effects of performance-enhancing drugs on the human body is something that's fascinating to me. And so I spend a great deal of time and have over the years educating myself about them and learning about them. And so I'm sharing my findings with you, but I'm not a doctor. And I'm not a lawyer either, and do not do anything illegal. So I hope you guys understand now the difference between steroids and performance-enhancing drugs, and why steroids is an inappropriate term to be using for a blanket term for performance-enhancing drugs. What makes a lot more sense would be to have things like, sex hormones, aka anabolic steroids, human growth hormone, insulin, peptide protein hormones, things like amphetamine-like compounds that increase focus, reaction time, stamina, and a whole wide-ass array of other things, okay? EPO is another one. So I do want to discuss EPO really quick, okay? So EPO is one that's really prevalent in biking, like the Tour de France. And what does EPO do? EPO increases red blood cell count. It makes the body manufacture more red blood cells. Why would an athlete want to do this? Red blood cells carry oxygen. Oxygen, the more red blood cells you have, the more oxygen you have available in your blood, the greater stamina you will have, okay? The more efficient your respiratory system is going to be functioning. You won't run out of oxygen as easily. So for endurance-based sports, ones where you're having to maintain a high heart rate for a long time, these are very, beneficial for those guys, and also incredibly dangerous, as EPO and high red blood cell counts, it's called hematocrit, when measured in a lab, makes the blood much thicker, because if there's more red blood cells concentrated into that blood volume, there's more viscosity or thickness to the blood, which I'm sure that you can think of why thicker blood for an athlete that's performing at a high level, pushing their bodies, is dangerous, or having that over time is dangerous, okay? So that is another one of these performance-enhancing drugs that is in no way an anabolic sex hormone steroid, okay? So the appropriate term to use as a blanket term for these things that athletes, bodybuilders, Olympians, whatever, Olympic athletes use is performance-enhancing drugs. That's the correct term to use. The old term is steroids. It's a really, it's a term that makes, everybody knows it, and it's like, oh, steroids, that devil compound, steroids. All right. And I want to talk to you guys a little bit too. I just want to remind you that these compounds, steroids, anabolic sex hormones, have been being used in athletics for very, very long time, almost since their creation, really. They were pretty much created and put into use in the early 1930s. And by the 1960s, actually NFL teams were mandating and fining their players for not taking anabolic steroids. A good example of this, and you can look it up on ESPN, you can search it, would be the San Diego Chargers and the Miami Dolphins in the 1960s. They had championship teams that they supplied Dianabol to their players in the off season. And so when they'd take them over to like a camp, right? And they'd do their off season camp where everybody stayed like at the ranch or whatever, the whole team, like the whole Chargers team would stay at the camp. And, when they were doing their meals, they would feed all the players, right? Everybody would get the Dianabol, which is a highly popular anabolic steroid, sex hormone, for building muscle and strength. And these players would, they would have to take it, or else they would be fined by their team. And, if this sounds really far-fetched to you, this was in the 1960s. You can look it up. So San Diego Chargers, 1960s, Dianabol, anabolic steroid, if you're curious, okay? So this has been going on for a long time. And this is, this video has discussed the difference between anabolic sex hormone steroids and then the vast array of different chemicals and compounds that constitute what are performance-enhancing drugs. And steroids, sex hormone, anabolic steroids, is a very inappropriate term to be labeling all those other things with that are not sex hormones that do increase performance in athletics, all right? The correct term is performance-enhancing drugs. This is Dan from bodybuilderinthailand.com.